Thank you. Thanks everyone who woke up early for these presentations. I know it's hard. It's a Saturday night in Seoul. All right, so I want to talk about building for usability. I want to talk about that for the most part, usually as blockchain, as systems, as crypto engineers and developers. We are so excited about building technology that we forget about that we're building for users. And so I do want to kind of dive into this, but first I'll give a quick overview of NEAR as well, and then we'll talk what are the things that we've seen developers and users really want in this ecosystem. So our vision as a whole is to build a world where people control their assets, data, and power of governance. And I think a lot of us in this ecosystem in Web3 share this vision because, Bitcoin started with this idea of controlling your own money. It extended to assets with DeFi. The data, I think, is, there's probably no single person who loves giving all of their data to Facebook or similar entities. And the governance is just your voice, your power to actually affect the outcomes of any decisions, right, which you are a member of. And this is especially true with recent world developments. And from our perspective, the way to achieve that is to deliver something that's simple to use, that's secure and scalable, and is sustainable. Now, the way we measure this, right, is how many people are actually actively engaged in this world, right? And so we have this audacious goal of getting 1 billion people to actually use this and through building the most usable blockchain. We're about 21 months post mainnet, and we're about 0.7% complete, so still a lot of work, but the rate of adoption is accelerating. Now, the way we're doing this is not by building a company, but actually by having an open source ecosystem. It starts at the core with a protocol, but then it expands into various infrastructure players, into various go-to-market and approaches, and various vertical applications that actually serving the end user. So just to mention some of the infrastructure, the NEAR protocol itself, right, is just a protocol with some open source implementations, and there's a lot of different companies already contributing to build it. At the same time, these companies have their own businesses. They have their own products that they deliver to the user or developer. And so infrastructure ones are like Pagoda, deliver a Web3 developer stack that allows you to build everything, have all the tools, manage your contract lifetime, have analytics, have triggers, and more. You have Calimera, which allows you to run private shards, which run inside your firewall of the company and allow to run contracts which process private data with pretty much on the same namespace as all the public contracts, so they can actually interact. Beyond that, you have interoperability, right? None of these blockchains live in a vacuum. There's a lot of other things going on, and so from the start, we've established to build the most trustless, permissionless bridge, which is Rainbow Bridge. It connects NEAR with Ethereum through a light clients, very much similar to IBC approach, but it is the only actually light client bridge to Ethereum at this point. You have something like Aurora, which allows to run all of the Ethereum smart contracts on NEAR through a pretty much EVM virtual machine just running as a smart contract. And so this general idea is that as we push for interoperability, more and more of things can be just run in the VM on top. At the same time, there is cases when you do need a more custom chain, app chain, and this is what Octopus allows you to do, is to spin up a completely different chain, but then through linking your runtime and linking your security into NEAR, you actually have both interoperability with Near and with all the other chains directly. Now, technology is good, but at the end, it's all about actually, getting applications to build, getting developers to adopt this, right? And so, instead of trying to kind of fit everything through, for example, Near Foundation, which is, as well very centralized approach, we have kind of spun out a number of ecosystem funds and verticals that are specifically focused on different types of developers, right? So one of the examples is Proximity, which is specifically focused on DeFi applications, and they are, working, helping, giving grants, sometimes helping writing code, kind of doing anything that's needed to grow the DeFi ecosystem. Similarly, you have Human Guild, which is doing that for gaming. They host, founder-to-founder sessions where founders help each other as they figure out kind of details of token economics and gaming. And more of such funds, for example, for sustainability that we're starting. The idea in general that, this ecosystem has so many different verticals, so many different approaches that you want different kind of teams that are solely focused on specific vertical to go in and help out projects. But also beyond that, the world is, vast, and although kind of being global, you still want to have local presence around the world. And so we started that actually in China originally because China has, very different language, very kind of disconnected information space. But since then, we launched already 4 other hubs, and we're launching kind of 3, 4 more in this quarter. The hubs are really kind of a local version of Near. It creates presence, it creates community, it has its own funding, it has its own product lab to build and help other people to build, and it allows to kind of really create presence that's local, that knows the language, that has kind of connections in the community in this place, and through that grow kind of this Web3 vision in that. And kind of really excited in starting one in Korea. Now, the way we see kind of the application growth is through 3 kind of specific verticals, right? I think finance is at this point pretty clear that I think everybody knows that finance has to go to market with blockchain. There's still obviously a lot of things to figure out, but there's a clear need, there's a clear want. And I think like traditional finance is going to be merging with DeFi and kind of creating a single space over time. And so through that, you have DeFi, you have a lot of like on-ramp, off-ramp, connecting to real world, allowing to pay, allowing to stream, kind of all of this toolkit that you need. The kind of less product market fit, but something that people get is creator economy, right? I think like a lot of artists understood the power of blockchain through NFTs because it allows them to kind of capture future resale price and kind of participate with their community very actively, which they could not do through Instagram or through YouTube. They don't really care about censorship resistance as much at this point, but they already understand kind of these connections that crypto can create. But beyond that, you have games, you have kind of music, art, all of these various things that are coming through the creator. They actually are the source of economic value in kind of our Web3 ecosystem, and they are what pulls in more and more people. And the third final part I think that's extremely important is social, right? We are at the end social kind of creatures, and social has been going through a lot of turmoil, and there's no single kind of current social platform that wants to do censorship, that wants to do kind of the moderations that they are must do. And so they all are trying to figure out how to become more community kind of focused, while you have now new social platforms starting up that are started with specific vision of community owned, censorship resistant, etc. And so like this is something that does not have yet a very clear product market fit, but it is, from my perspective, coming. Now the 3 main verticals actually create a flywheel. The more you have people coming for creators, the more they will want social, because that's how they connect to their creators and their fans. The more you have of this economy created, the more financial tooling you will need that will actually bring more people into the creator economy. So you have a flywheel that actually accelerates the more you have on any of the sites. Now, this picture, like we've presented this for, I don't know, a year and a half. This picture always had this something missing. And the something missing is like, how do people get into the system? Because if you think of like a random creator in Philippines, they don't have even initial, fee to pay to sign up or to mint first things, right? And the answer has been throughout past like 6 months is a way to onboard users through a various kind of tools like Move to Earn, like Work to Earn, like Something to Earn, where you don't need to actually buy in to start participating in the economy. You are able to pretty much trade your attention or your time for crypto directly and kind of efficiently. And so Sweatcoin being one that has like 100 million downloads already and 10 million users. Tracer is launching here in Korea. You have NearCrowd, which has been around for a year and has like 2,000 people working every day actually collecting data for machine learning problems. And you have Brave, which is just direct attention to earn. And so you have all these ways that actually onboard users directly into the system and get them assets and something to have. Now, kind of behind all this is the idea that usability matters, right? At the end, like if we want to get to 1 billion people, this means most of the people will not know what blockchain is, what blocks are, hash function, any of these things. Probably a lot of those people think like Facebook is internet, right? That's kind of a pretty prevalent understanding right now. And so most protocols don't actually mention how they're going to be building for usability. How's it going to make it available, right? Like you cannot, if you're talking about how we create a new cryptography, it's really hard to think how do you actually get it to users in a way that understandable. And the things like scalability, the things like security should be going hand in hand with usability. Because at the end, like scalability we're doing because we want to deliver a better experience to the users, which does not kind of change when you have some application becoming successful. Security at the end is something that is like should be straightforward to the user and should not scare them. So I'll dive in a little bit for the developers first, and then we'll talk about the users. So the reason for developers first is, first of all, here we're all developers, and we think kind of first. And myself being developer, like I wanna make sure my experience is good, right? Because if my experience is good, like I can spend more time making sure my user's experience is good too. And so kind of the idea that starts is like, well, my experience is good when the tooling is good, but also the platform itself, the thing I'm building on does not give me complexity, and at the same time gives me the kind of capabilities and scalability they want. And so the only way to scale is to parallelize. I think at this point everybody's agreed on that. And there's just different ways of parallelization, one of which is modularity, right? It's L2s, L3s, L4s. And it allows to have a kind of more experimentation across the stack, which I think been beneficial for everyone. But it does lead to kind of a overall drop in performance, right? If we're talking about latency, if we're talking about the complexity of UX, of like how exactly you're thinking, and again, like obviously, some of these things are very subjective because you can think of like, well, L2 is a new L1, and then if this L2 is L1, then it doesn't really matter. But that's not true. You have lots of L2s right now that you kind of work in parallel, and like the comparison I can draw is back when PCs were coming out, they allowed for a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of different different GPUs were produced, different mother cards, different CPUs. Like they all tried to fit in with each other in the same sockets, but you had something like Apple, which kind of did not allow for this flexibility, and it took them more time actually to to catch up, but when the innovation curve stabilized, they end up building a more integrated experience. And through this integration, they actually end up building a more better experience, and that outperformed kind of this modularity. And so, like, kind of the belief is that a more integrated experience will deliver better UX, and at the end will outperform as well in kind of raw performance the modular experience. And to do that, you need obviously parallelization. Parallelization means sharding, and so you need a sharding that actually delivers this experience, but then hides it from developers and users, right? As a developer user, you should not need to think, where is your application? Is it on this shard, on this layer 2, on that layer 2? Like, you should not need to think about it. This should be completely hidden, and the underlying infrastructure should be able to kind of rearrange things as it's needed to deliver you better performance. And that's what we've been kind of building from the start. Now, it's a long journey. It takes a bunch of time to actually get there. We've launched with actually 1 shard, even though like most of the stuff been built. We actually resharded to 4 shards late last year, and with the point that there's been 0 impact to the developers or users. Like, nothing changes, even though there's kind of more capacity of the network came in. We're launching a chunk-only producers this September. And this is the idea to actually expand more validators on the network, bring in kind of validator nodes that will be validating only specific shard. I mean, like rotating, but validating only single shard and a few shards. And through that, pretty much enable us to get to kind of final nightshade, where you have no nodes that validating all shards. And the final stage is where we get this kind of fully dynamic resharding. Is this idea that at the end, it actually doesn't matter where exactly your contract is, if the network is smart enough to actually allocate you the resources you need, right? And so think of on near, each contract can get up to a full chain of capacity, right? So, and we actually have this right now. Aurora runs actually on a dedicated shard and has a full chain of capacity, as if they run their own separate L2 or a separate Cosmos chain, but they don't need to handle any of the validator stuff. They don't need to handle any of the RPC stuff. They just deal with their own kind of application space. And so the idea here is actually get to the state where it's dynamically reallocated based on the load of your contracts. So think of Amazon, where you pay as you go for what you take, not for all the capacity pre-allocated. On the other side, as developers, right, we want tools. We want experience. And so kind of from the start, we've been trying to build something that is very pleasant, very nice. We have everything from command line interface that allows you to interact with blockchain. We have I'll show in a second a tool to create near app in 5 seconds. We have all this stack of tools in JavaScript and Rust and some bunch of stuff in Python, Swift. We have things like wallet selector that allows you to kind of embed directly into your app. Multiple major RPC providers, including Pagoda and Infura. You have data reads, which if you're a developer, you know that data reading is actually bigger problems than sending transactions right now. And you need to, like, if you want to actually scale, to actually have 1 million users, you need to cache a lot of data. How do you do that? We have a framework for that. You have analytics triggers and a lot of stuff on Pagoda. You have Rust, and I'll talk about JavaScript, education, kind of, and a bunch of other stuff. There's more developers building cool stuff every day. Now, I'll mention JavaScript because, first of all, we kind of have a full launch. Now I'm lost in time zones, but on August 8th, tomorrow. And the kind of high level is, JavaScript is probably the most, well, it's not probably, it is the most kind of used and known language in the developer space. And the idea is that now you can actually ship Web3 code directly to blockchain without learning any new languages, without kind of needing to figure out anything. It is, getting on a feature parity with Rust. It's as simple as, write some, pretty much create near app, select JavaScript, select what front end you want, and just run, like you have a JavaScript smart contract, you can edit it and just yarn deploy, and it's on testnet. and yarn start to get the front end running, and you have a pretty much full app live with JavaScript smart contract, and you can go and edit the smart contract and upgrade it actually directly with yarn deploy. So you have pretty much, in about 15 seconds, you can get a full Web3 app running, and it's in JavaScript, end-to-end, front-end and back-end smart contract, and you can kind of continue iterating on it as you please. And it's all links through the Explorer and everything. And so the reason why this is possible is because the team that's working on contract runtime in Near Protocol has optimized the WebAssembly about 7x since launch. And so we end up getting able to run a QuickJS, one of the JavaScript machines, a full JavaScript virtual machine, as a smart contract on Near. So this is the same idea as Aurora in a way, because Aurora is an EVM. Like we took a piece of EVM code and just run it as a smart contract. And so this just showcases you how powerful you can be on Near is just taking existing applications, existing platforms, and just running them and customizing and building things on top of them. So check it out. It's, there's a QR code or pagoda.co/JSSDK if you are interested and want to launch something today. All right. So going forward, we talked about developers, right? And I mean, developers are close to my heart, but at the end, it's about users, right? If we want to get to 1 billion users, we need, probably, ideally 1 million developers, but we need that 1 billion users. So we started this from the day one, is that we did not want to replicate the account model that pretty much all of the blockchains use, because that account model is confusing, and it doesn't, if you think of, your friends who are not in technology, right? If you tell them hey, can you send me some money to my X5Y lowercase z ... address, you probably lost them somewhere there. And so we started with how do we get human readable IDs, and how do we solve this key management problem, right? People are afraid of kind of this keys, right, in general, seed phrases, and so the idea here, Near accounts have a username, like Illia.near, and a number of keys with different permissions, right? And so think of them as devices or as, applications. So when you are adding a new device, let's say you're adding your phone, it actually can add a new key, a different access key for your specific device, which means you can always disable it. You can always kind of program it for specific reasons. You are allowed, it's possible to give a key specific permissions and allowance, right? So this is very useful when you want to have for example, your game front end to have a special key that only can interact with this game up to some amount of money. And so you can only authorize this key once through login process, and then your front end of your game can now interact with the blockchain on the user's behalf without going to the wallet every time. Right, so that kind of flow where if you want to breed a new animal and you need to go to a wallet to approve that transaction, you don't need to do that. You can just approve kind of breeding as a permission and then just do it as the user interacts. Obviously, you can build customizable multisigs, right? You can think of your phone and your desktop. Maybe on the phone, you limit yourself to only spend $1,000 per day. And so you're not tempted, but also if in case phone is stolen. The more interesting, you can actually delegate to another party some specific permissions. And so the suggestion that I have, given most people are scared about the seed phrases, losing them, instead of just having your seed phrase somewhere stored securely, which never happens, you actually give a permission to a semi-trusted party, like a bank, or maybe a group of friends, to be able to recover a seed phrase for you with a delay, right? So imagine you lost your seed phrase, you need to recover, you call up your bank, they do your normal authorization procedure, and they initiate a key rotation process. It will take, for example, 7 days to actually get there, and so in 7 days you're good. Now, if banks tries to do it without your consent, first of all, you'll see it, you get a notification about it. and you can stop it because you have the key at that point, and you can like actually kick them out. But then on top of it, you can actually sue them because you have a legal document with a bank. Right? Now you can have similar with a group of friends who can together recover, etc. if you don't have a bank access, and like there's multiple other semi-trusted parties you can enlist in this process. And then the other really cool thing is single-use private key. You can actually generate a private key and then give it to someone to send one single transaction, right? Because after that transaction, that key will be removed from the account, so it's not actually able to use it. And so that allows you to do really interesting things, including creating an account for someone and then giving it to them to actually claim and rotate the keys, right? And so this idea of rotating keys means you can have maybe less secure wallets initially, less secure setup initially, and then as you get more assets, as your accounts become more valuable, you can actually just rotate keys. And so this goes into security, right? Security kind of, I mentioned like people are scared of seed phrases, things are getting stolen all the time, like there's constant issues with contracts, with wallets, with everything. And so that's why kind of going beyond just like, hey, your seed phrase is your account, like how do we get to a state where it is way more kind of active security, right? If you think of Web 2, in Web 2, like we've learned a lot on how to prevent malicious kind of activity, right? Like Google runs a very kind of comprehensive outlier analysis on your actions, detecting if something is off, right? And so we're not doing this at anything, right? Like if you have a transaction that literally moves all your assets to a known stolen account, like nobody will stop that transaction, right? Which seems bizarre if you think about it, right? So the idea here, you can actually have a more active custody, right? Where instead of just your account, kind of your key signing every single transaction and that goes right away, you can have kind of a multi-sig, right? Or split key with threshold signatures to enable that. You can also have on-chain audit registries for contracts, ensuring that when you're interacting in the wallet with a contract, it's actually being audited. It does not have existing vulnerabilities, and it has a bug bounty and all of the security kind of measures, right? So you can have all of this information be more actively provided to the user, instead of just kind of passively hoping that users will check that the contract indeed is deployed on this address, that the audits are done and somewhere linked in front end. And so like all of this, we kind of need to get way better at protecting users on how they interacting with applications. Now, just to show a few things, this is creating a DAO on Near, and just kind of the interesting thing is because Near accounts are contracts, you can actually turn even your account potentially into a DAO. So for example, let's say you started by creating a bunch of art and selling as NFTs, you created kind of a royalties pointed at your account. Later, you can actually turn your account into a DAO and start offer that as a way to manage these royalties and receive that revenue stream. So think of it as like your account becomes a business in a way that you can then kind of turn into community-owned business. But the idea is like what AstroDAO allows you to do is actually configure a number of parameters. And so AstroDAO really has flexibility to go from things like, equal community of people to a full-on like a board with executive branch with treasury managers with etc. Right? So like there's a number of like different groups with different permissions with different limits. And here another example is this like one-time link, one-time private key actually used to onboard users, right? So you can actually generate a one-time key that allows you to send a single transaction that claims NFT, like creates an account and claims an NFT, right? And so this example, that Satori does, that you can receive just the email link or through SMS, through Telegram, and if you don't have an account, you'll just set up an account, and as soon as you do it, you actually have an NFT in your wallet. So that's kind of as simple as this. Like people don't need to think about install MetaMask, or figure out like how to get crypto to claim an NFT, to mint it, etc. You just like send them a link, boom, they're in blockchain, they have an NFT. And you can send anything, right? You can send money to people who don't have accounts yet, because you don't need to know their account before sending this. Now, I'll just quickly go over what's next. There's a bunch of stuff that already here, but we're still kind of only on only starting for real. And so the kind of a bunch of infrastructure is still missing. I think like privacy is probably one of the bigger things that like we all love to talk about, but it's still like blockchain right now is still a transparency engine, not a privacy engine. Obviously, we can do a lot with zero knowledge for compression, as Starknet folks were talking about. Governance is a big thing. You know, if we want people to govern, like we need to have tools to give people to govern, right? Because right now, you know, one token, one vote kind of thing doesn't fully work. You need community-governed AI. My background is in AI. We're kind of getting to a lot of interesting spaces in AI, but they're still controlled by, you know, few corporations. Like we need to unlock this and kind of hook it in with all the other ecosystem. We are working on actually some research in synchronous sharding to actually scale up some of the things like Aurora. And then I think, and I mentioned this, like traditional finance and DeFi kind of merging together, bringing together is kind of bringing real world assets, bringing crypto and banking together. And so projects like Nearpay, for example, getting a banking license is an example of something that is very powerful. The other thing is that in reality, users for the most part don't really care which application their stuff, like which chain the application they're using is on, if it's smooth enough for them to use, right? And so the idea is to add so-called remote accounts, which allows you to kind of hide from the user kind of the specifics of the blockchain that application is on. So you log in with your wallet, MetaMask, you know, Phantom, etc., to the application, and then it figures out how to bridge your things and how to kind of show you data from the right chain. And so there's a lot of kind of pieces to make this happen, but what this will allow to do is to actually kind of abstract out like users and applications kind of from the chain specifically. And obviously beyond that, right, is we talked about, like I talked about social, but so there's a whole graph I have of components that needed to bring social to Web3. And so we really need to start doing this right now because I think like a lot of the social is going to be like, and it's already crumbling, like for various reasons, right? And social graph is probably one of the biggest pieces, but also reputation, certification, and kind of communication messaging that's needed. So just to mention, as I finish up, we have a NearCon in September in Lisbon, so everybody's welcome. And if you have questions, let me know.